Welcome. I am going to tell you a story that happened to my friend in one of the most mysterious places in Czech Republic. I visited a childhood friend called Jakub. He lives in České Budějovice in a neighborhood called Zavadilka. We have known each other since childhood. His parents lived in a house just a few blocks away from us, and we often played together and got up to various mischief. Then school came, and we attended together until the 5th grade. After that, our family had to move due to the construction of new houses, and since then we only saw each other a few times, but we remained friends and occasionally called each other. And now in recent years, we mostly exchanged messages. So he messaged me that he wants to meet. We met in Budějovice, at a small cafe under the arcade, overlooking the square and Samson's fountain. The square was bustling with activity. We sat in the nicely arranged garden in front of the cafe and ordered something light to drink. After a brief greeting and polite phrases, Jakub mentioned an incident that had recently happened to him and prevented him from sleeping at all. One day, at the beginning of the year, when the days were still short and twilight fell early in the afternoon, he was returning home from work. The weather was gloomy, accompanied by light rain, and Jakub took a shortcut, as he had done many times before, through the nearby Branišovský Forest. Having lived next to the forest his whole life, he was familiar with many mysterious legends told about the Boar Forest, but he never attached much significance to them, simply because we had spent half our lives playing there as kids. Boar Forest is located west of České Budějovice, just beyond the My housing estate. It is divided by a road into two parts, with the northern part called Vboru and the southern part called Vlčí Jáma. As Jakub approached the halfway point of his journey, he suddenly began to notice how the fog gradually started to rise from the ground. It created a veil that shrouded the surrounding trees and added even more mystery to the forest, intensified by the approaching twilight. Silence surrounded him, as if nature was holding its breath. Not a sound could be heard, not the falling raindrops, the whisper of the wind, or the singing of birds nearby. He was surrounded by complete, oppressive, and unusual silence. Jakub stopped and observed his surroundings. Suddenly, he sensed a faint, indistinct melody reaching him from a distance. He couldn't determine its source or direction, but he felt it permeate his entire body and take control of him. He felt his heart beating faster and goosebumps forming on his skin. He had never experienced such a feeling before. He stood there for several long minutes, completely paralyzed, his body resonating with the mysterious melody, which was still barely audible. It was a melody full of sadness and nostalgia that etched deep into his mind. A light breeze began to rise around him, gradually gaining strength, rustling the fallen leaves and playing with them, faster and faster. It was almost dark, and then a figure emerged from the darkness, slowly gaining clarity against the darkened outlines of the trees. The figure emitted a reddish glow, and Jakub was astonished by this unexpected sight. He found himself unable to move from the spot. Time seemed to suddenly stand still, as the figure observed him from a distance, without approaching. Jakub noticed that the figure looked like an older man, dressed in a dark long coat or a cloak, and a hat that partly covered his face. The reddish aura surrounding his body resembled the twilight glow. Jakub felt as we were face to face with something supernatural. The figure seemed to float a few inches above the ground, or at least that's how it appeared from his perspective. He tried to move, but his legs seemed to betray him. He could only move slowly, struggling to escape through the forest. With each step, it became harder to avoid obstacles that seemed to appear in his path on their own. He constantly stumbled over fallen branches and various rocks. He wanted to reach the nearby farmhouse, where we had experienced many adventures together. The farmhouse had once served as a gamekeeper's lodge, but had been abandoned for many years and fallen into disrepair. Recently, someone had started taking care of it and gradually repairing it. Although the farmhouse was not far away, it seemed to Jakub that it took an eternity to reach it. He even fell a few times and ended up rolling in a muddy puddle. The path he would normally cover quickly and easily now stretched into infinite distance. Nevertheless, he slowly approached it. He wanted to hide behind its lonely walls. He was desperate and sought any shelter from the mysterious figure that continued to pursue him. Along the way, he passed an old chapel standing in front of the farmhouse and finally decided to seek refuge inside. When he reached the chapel, he removed the old decaying planks that carefully blocked the entrance and squeezed inside, immediately enveloped by the smell of old musty mold and the stale air of the unventilated space. It was a dark and silent place, with walls covered in dampness and the marks of time's decay. Jakub looked around, searching for a place to hide. He decided to take cover behind the remains of a crumbling altar that still stood in its place. A symbol of the past and fate that had survived in this abandoned chapel, it was surrounded by dirty, moldy mattresses and the mess that homeless people had brought there to seek shelter from the weather. When he caught his breath a bit, he wanted to take out his phone to call home. However, to his horror, he realized that he didn't have his mobile phone in his pocket and must have lost it somewhere during his fall. He waited there for what seemed like an hour or two. At least that's how it felt to him. He was tense and full of fear, waiting to see what would happen. He didn't have any light with him to illuminate the surroundings even a little, so he contemplated what had actually happened to him. What could it have been? A faceless man with a red aura, and with strangely glowing red eyes, pursuing him. He had never encountered anything like it before. It was terrifying and unbelievable. Jakub had never believed in supernatural beings, ghosts, or similar entities before. He had an internal struggle between rational explanations and the possibility of supernatural phenomenon. Maybe he imagined things that didn't exist. Perhaps he had just hallucinated. Or, while thinking about it, he actually just fell asleep. When he woke up, he didn't initially understand where he was, how he got there, and why. But then he remembered his pursuer, and a strange chilling tremor ran through him. He slowly stood up and cautiously approached the exit of the chapel, wanting to get a better look outside, toward the forest from which he had rushed here, to see if his pursuer was still outside. It was dark, but he could see that dawn was slowly approaching. The mysterious figure was nowhere to be seen or heard anymore. He felt a great relief when he realized that he was no longer being followed. Exhausted, he waited a while, vigilant and nervous, as he wasn't entirely certain if the figure might return, and then he made up his mind and went outside. As a precaution, he took a large detour on his way home to avoid the forest, which now filled him with horror and unease. He arrived home in daylight, grateful that he had survived the mysterious incident in the forest. He was glad that he managed to escape the pursuit and return home unharmed. However, since the incident, he began to suffer from nightmares and sleep problems. At night, memories of the mysterious figure and the fear he experienced continued to haunt him. The forest, which had once been so familiar to him, had now become a place of horror and unrest. Jakub looked very tired, but after he told me this story, it seemed that a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. We started discussing what had happened and what the mysterious apparition could mean. Jakub searched online and found out that he was not the only person to be pursued in the Branišovský Forest. It turned out that many strange things were happening in that forest. Needless to say, Jakub doesn't take shortcuts on his way from work anymore. Thank you for listening. I hope that you have enjoyed this story and that you learned something new about a place that you might have not heard about before. If you did, please like and subscribe,